tubular cast on for 2x2 ribbing creates a beautiful edge, which is similar to what you'd see on a ready-to-wear store-bought sweater. The knit stitches curl around the edge and blend into the knit stitches on the other side. To do the tubular cast on, you'll need some needles for working in a small circumference in the round. Even if you're casting on for a large project like the body of a sweater, the initial cast on is only half that size, so using double pointed needles or the magic loop method might be necessary. You'll also want to have a contrasting color waste yarn that is smooth. You don't want a really fuzzy yarn that's going to leave fibers in the contrasting color on your project. And your working yarn, you want these yarns to be the same weight yarn. It's just easier. And a tapestry needle. You won't be using this for seaming anything. You'll use it to pick out some stitches. I think the small tip of the tapestry needle is usually a little easier to use than the tip of a double pointed needle, but that would work in a pinch if you don't have a tapestry needle around. So let's get started. In my sample, I wanted to cast on a total of 60 stitches, but to get here we only need to start with half of that number. We're working in the round on double pointed needles, so we'll divide it exactly in half because we'll have an equal number of knit stitches and purl stitches. If you're working this back and forth in rows, figuring out how many stitches to begin with is somewhat different, since the number of knit and purl stitches may differ. There may be more knit stitches than purl stitches, in which case you'll subtract the number of extra knit stitches from the total, divide the resulting number in half, and then add those extra knit stitches back on. For this example, I've used some smooth contrasting color waste yarn to cast on 30 stitches, half of my total. The original cast on method that you use doesn't really matter, though consider that each stitch will need to be picked out later to unravel it. I always use the long tail cast on. It's just the one I prefer to use because it's the one I'm used to, though if you think another cast on is easier for this technique, please mention it in the comments. After casting on in the waste yarn, join it to work in the round and knit 2 rounds in stockinette stitch. Those 2 rounds are used to just establish working in the round and to give your working yarn something to hold on to. If your waste yarn is attached to a larger ball of yarn, you may cut it here to get it out of the way or keep it attached to roll it back into the ball when you're done. It'll work either way. So then change to your working yarn and knit 4 rounds in the working yarn. Now all the stitches for your ribbing are currently on the needle. On the next round, we'll be picking up stitches for the purl stitches. In the patterns where I use this technique, I begin with 1 knit stitch and then 2 purl stitches, and then it continues as knit 2, purl 2 to the end where it ends with 1 knit stitch. So that's how I'm going to be describing this technique for you. If your pattern begins with 2 knit stitches, then you would begin with 2 knit stitches and then do the purl stitches as I'm about to show you. Or if your pattern begins with 2 purl stitches, you could start with the purl stitches that I'm about to show you and then make your knit stitches. So to begin with 1 knit stitch, you just knit the first stitch and slide that off, just like a regular knit stitch. Now we're going to add 2 purl stitches between this knit stitch and the next one. And to do that, bring your yarn to the front and flip it over, and you can see this tail here where you joined your working yarn. Move that over to the side, and beside it you'll see these loops. They look like the top of a little N in the working yarn. What you want to do is take your left needle, that is this one right down here, and you go from the bottom to the top and you just pick up that stitch. So let me show you that again. Here's the little tail where you joined it. Here's the top of the little N in the working yarn right to the left of it. That's going to be your first purl stitch. So just slide your left needle in there and pick that up, and then you can purl into it. Okay, so now we have 1 knit stitch, 1 purl stitch, and we're going to add another purl stitch before we continue on with the knitting. So we'll go back here and we'll take a look. Here's the one we just picked up. So we'll go over to the next. So we'll go over here to the next one. And it's a little tricky, so try to hold the stitches in your left needle so they don't slide off. while you're picking up that stitch right there. So there is our next purl stitch, and we can just purl into that one. So there we have one knit stitch and 2 purl stitches. So in our pattern, we'll knit 2 more stitches. So knit 1, purl 2, knit 2, and we need 2 more purl stitches. And they are back here. 1, 2. So we'll pick this one up from the bottom to the top and purl into it. And then we'll pick up the next one and purl into that. Then knit 2 more stitches. And next I'm going to show you how to make this go a little bit faster. So when you're going to pick up these 2 purl stitches, you know you need 2 of them. So you can pick them both up at the same time. So we got 1, 2, and we'll pick up the second one first because it'll be worked second on the needle, and then the first one. So they're in the order that you're going to be knitting them as they appear on the needle. Then you can just purl 1, 2, and then knit 2 more. And you basically just keep doing this, picking up 2 stitches for your purl stitches and knitting the other 2 stitches all the way around your row. And at the end there should be 1 knit stitch left after these 2 knits. So we'll pick up our last 2 stitches. And you always want to make sure you're picking up the lowest of the working yarn. So for this very last stitch, you want to make sure you're all the way down here and not just picking up the one beside the second to last stitch here. So make sure you get this one all the way down here. Look at that one. And that one. And then we just knit the last stitch. And now the 2x2 ribbing is established, beginning with a knit 1 stitch and ending with a knit 1 stitch. Once all your purl stitches are picked up, now we can remove the waste yarn. So find the beginning tail of the waste yarn cast on. And this is a little tedious, but just kind of go all the way around, and I use a tapestry needle to just pick that end out of each of the stitches. And I use the long tail cast on, as I mentioned before. I just think it's easiest to find the loop for each stitch to pull out when I use this stitch. It's just, you follow this down and it's right here. It's just like a little twist. It comes from over here, twists around the stitch and goes off to the tail. And we just pull that out. 1 stitch at a time all the way around. When you get back to the beginning of the round, you'll see that the tail kind of goes through one of these loops. Just keep pulling on it until you're able to just start pulling on them and it unravels easily. And at some point for your last round, as you pull it, you'll see that it kind of disappears into a tube. And that's why this is called the tubular cast on. So now the stitches from your waste yarn are all removed, but the yarn is still trapped there inside that tube. If you cut your yarn, you can pull from either end to get that out of there. Or if your yarn is still attached to the ball, figure out which end is attached to the ball and pull on that one to get all the yarn to come through. Sometimes it's tight and you can't pull it all the way around. So you could start at the halfway point, pick that waste yarn out of there, and pull half of it through, and then you can pull the other half through more easily. Okay, and now we can pull from over here. And there we have it. There is the tubular cast on. I've knit a few more rounds in the ribbon, and you can see how these knit stitches just kind of curl over the edge and blend into the knit stitches that are on the back. I think this is such a streamlined cast on. If you've enjoyed this, please like this video, and if you like learning about new knitting techniques, please subscribe to my channel, hit that little notification bell, and I will see you in another video. Happy knitting!